Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it.
And as we've been reporting, President Trump making a major health announcement today, claiming the use of Tylenol during pregnancy may link to autism.
I definitely have dealt with vaccine hesitancy, anti-vax sentiment my entire career and through my training. You also saw that virus causing harm. So we got this perfect storm where everyone can have a voice. You now had this ability to spread more misinformation.
Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician and mother, helping families navigate child health in an age of fear and misinformation.
So people start to really question this entire process, and that opened up this Pandora's box of, I don't want to get any vaccine. I have seen the devastation that vaccine-preventable illnesses can cause. But when you start saying this is poison, this vaccine has microchips, or this vaccine is unnecessary or is going to kill people, I'm going to put my foot down because...
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Kidsy Connects. I am so delighted to introduce our next guest, Dr. Mona Amin. Dr. Mona Amin is a board-certified pediatrician who has been helping families across the country raise healthy, confident kids for over 2 decades. And she joins us today from sunny, warm Florida. I am envious of that weather because it's 20 degrees in Chicago today.
I always forget, thank you for having me. I always forget that when it hits this time of the year, like fall, winter, that people around the country are not experiencing what I do. Like I have to remember that, oh, yeah, it's cold. It's going to be cold for some people right now. So sending you warmth and love.
Thank you. I need that. There is so much to get into today, but what I'm really excited about in our conversation is to really take a deep dive into, of course, a lot of things related to children and health, but particularly around vaccines.
Yeah.
There has been so much hoopla in the news lately. It sort of feels like this topic has become very politicized.
Yes.
And divisive, when it feels like a decade ago, it was probably a little simpler than that. Tell me why, from your perspective, this is such a hot button issue.
I feel you. You know, I have been in clinical practice out of residency for 10 years. And then, of course, I had residency training and all of that and medical training. And I definitely have dealt with vaccine hesitancy, anti-vax sentiment my entire career and through my training. But there's a few things that I think have happened. One predominantly was the pandemic. So we saw in front of our eyes a novel virus, novel meaning, new, not something that has been introduced to the human body. And we saw the vaccine process in real time, meaning on a large scale, right? And you also saw that virus causing harm, not only obviously in the adult population, then obviously in children as well. And I'm talking about those strains in that first year and a year and a half, right? And so what you saw is a lot of people questioning the entire process on vaccine creation. You had a lot of voices voicing now, because thanks to social media, things that weren't always correct. So we got this perfect storm of, in an era of social media where everyone can have a voice, you now had this ability to spread more misinformation or lack of nuance or not being able to explain the full truth in a setting of a public health crisis. So with that came a lot of people who were concerned about the development of the vaccine. Is it rushed? Why am I being forced to get something when I don't need it or don't want it? So people start to really question this entire process. And that opened up this Pandora's box of, I don't want to get any vaccine now. I want to question all these vaccines, the childhood vaccine schedule. And then the third component to this, which I don't think people realize, is we have obviously social media, we have the pandemic, we also have the changing nature of a healthcare system. So especially in pediatric medicine, pediatricians' offices are shutting down because they can't meet the overhead costs of running a practice. And that has to do with a lot of the low reimbursements we get from insurance companies to be able to keep our doors open. So what's happening is now you either have a big box pediatric practice that is running, like corporate medicine, like hamsters in a wheel, churn and burn, and you don't get time with your doctor, or you have to pay extra for a direct primary care practice. And what's happening is a lot of families are not feeling seen by their doctor. So what happens when you don't feel seen? You can't get your questions asked, or your doctor's a little burnt out because they're seeing a lot of patients. You feel like they don't understand you. You feel like you're being dismissed. So you're going to go to places that have your back, that will answer your questions. And that's going to be online. That's going to be accounts that fuel pseudoscience because they have the time to do so. That's going to be podcasters that do that same thing. So by design, we've created this system that isn't allowing time to have these deep, meaningful conversations that I think every parent deserves, and pushing them into the hands of people who don't have the right information or are making money with misinformation, or in that terminology, disinformation about vaccines. And that is a huge disservice to the whole public health industry of like keeping people healthy and safe.
That's such a great point. And, I also feel like the pandemic really brought the topic of vaccines to the surface.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between taking a vaccine for a disease or a virus that is net new in the world and has never been seen before versus taking a vaccine for a disease or a virus that has been around for decades, if
Yes.
not centuries, but then only got really discovered and labeled over time. The two aren't the same, obviously, right?
I agree with that. And I also like to be clear that I had very pro-vaccine families. I'm talking families that loved every vaccine, like on the schedule, right? Maybe they did flu, but they also did everything on routine, that came to me saying, I don't know why I don't want to get the COVID vaccine. And I didn't sit there and say, because you're crazy. No, I said, I get it. It's because it's new. It hasn't been given to the human body, the vaccine, right? And now you're having to trust something that's essentially new. So I understood why parents felt that way. So when I approach that, it becomes understanding the position that someone may be in, walking them through that decision, but also as a doctor, understanding that at the end of the day, especially with a virus and vaccine that's newer, I can't force someone's hand. My job is to give the information I have and the guidance that they can make that best decision for their family. And you're right that the vaccines that are there for a while, I'm talking your routine schedule. The reason I trust those vaccines so much is that I have seen the benefits outweighing the risks, not only from data, but also from clinical practice. Being in residency, not only medical school, but you're talking residency, and then you're talking 10 years of practice. I have seen the harm vaccine preventable illnesses have. And on the flip side, I have not seen devastating outcomes from getting a vaccine. Have I seen side effects? Have I seen a febrile seizure? Have I seen that? Yes, but it's far outweighs the benefits of outweighing the risks versus the risk of vaccine. And that's why I'm so pro-vaccine in terms of the routine schedule. And that is an important distinction here. It is okay to be vaccine curious. It is okay to have questions and to be hesitant. But what's not okay is when anti-vax people, and that terminology is different, spread misinformation. And I will put my foot down for the misinformation spreading. I will never put my foot down for asking genuine questions because there's a difference. But when you start saying this is poison, no one needs this vaccine has microchips, or this vaccine is unnecessary or is going to kill people, I'm going to put my foot down because I've seen the benefits these vaccines have done, including the COVID vaccine. I personally don't get the COVID booster anymore, and I don't get the vaccine for my children because my husband's an ER doc. I'm a pediatrician. We have just seen that the virus as it stands now is not doing the same thing that it did back 5 years ago, right? We see a difference. So because of that, we said, you know what? It's not really doing much harm, the virus. So is it really needed to get the vaccine? And we made that decision because we are a benefit risk family. And I was like, well, it has to far outweigh the risk. And to me, there's no real benefit given that my kids have had COVID a gazillion times. I've had COVID even with boosters, and I stopped getting them. I'm still getting COVID. And my husband hasn't had to intubate someone with COVID in over 2.5 years. Whether they're vaccinated or not. And that's why we made that decision. But it's not a vaccine are bad, COVID vaccine, it's bad. This is a decision that makes sense for us. And that is what vaccines should be. But I will always harp on the fact that the routine schedule is well trusted. We have seen so much population data. We do checks and balances that I do believe that those benefits will always outweigh the risk when we look at it as it stands.
I'm not even going to get into the anti-vaxxers because I feel that is a whole separate part of society and the world that there is no convincing that group. There is misinformation, there is fear mongering. I mean, in 2025, there's still an active flat earth society movement that exists. So in my mind, I'm clubbing that group together. I think what this conversation is really for, and what we're trying to really establish here is for the people that are either on the periphery. So they're not anti-vaxxers, but they are curious, concerned, most likely. And I've also had girlfriends who have vaccinated their kids for many, many years. And then all of a sudden now are questioning, hang on a second, does my toddler really need 3 boosters? Or,
Right.
this really aggressive scheduling of, I'm not sure if it was the Hep B or the Hep A or the Hep C, booster shots, but so many in such a short span of time given to such a small body. So this conversation is really for those people who are curious, concerned. And then you also start to see data and
Yeah.
research come out of, and the language is really soft. It never says like this, X causes Y, but then there's questions around, well, what about autism? And what about all of these other side effects that go beyond a fever or nausea for a couple of days? So I'd love to sort of talk to that audience. I'm sure you get a ton of patients that come to you who are on the periphery. How do you explain this to them?
I love that. And that is the population that I also try to reach with all of my resources. And I'm happy we're understanding that because, like you mentioned, I can't turn the hand of someone who's been turned already, right? Like if you've already turned so far around that you believe so strongly with conviction that vaccines are causing harm, I'm not going to convince you, just like you're not going to convince me that vaccines are harmful. Right? Because I have seen the benefits of vaccines. I've rounded in NICUs. I've rounded in PICUs. I have seen the devastation that vaccine preventable illnesses can cause. And so you can't convince me that they're this horrible invention. I'm never
Right.
going to turn my hand.
Yeah.
What you can convince me is, hey, let's have conversation about it. And to answer your question about how I approach it, I've approached it very differently throughout my 10 years. When I graduated residency, I want to be clear that I had this very big, I know what I know, you know what you know, but I know and I know better. And I've changed in the last 10 years, not only from being a patient in the ICU myself, having a son in the NICU, being on the other side of a medical system, and also just being a mom, I now have way more compassion and understanding of the curiosity behind vaccines. So I want to be clear when your listeners are listening to this that I've also felt the feelings that a lot of your listeners may feel of like, is this okay? When my son was born, he had a stroke and seizures. And I've shared this story online. And when you have a seizure, I mentioned that there's some vaccines that can increase the seizure threshold, which is your DTaP vaccine. One of the side effects listed is a febrile seizure after the DTaP vaccine. So when my son was 2 months and it was time for him to get that vaccine, I was nervous. And I am a pro-vaccine mom.
What is the DTaP vaccine? I want to hear the rest of your story, but just for our audience, what is a DTaP vaccine and what is it there to cure?
So the DTaP vaccine is usually given in a combination vaccine. It's not as a standalone, but it's usually in something called the Pentacell vaccine or the Pediatrix vaccine at your doctor's office. And the DTaP itself stands for diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. So that component has been linked to febrile seizure risk. Okay. And febrile seizures are when you get a high fever and a seizure. Now, the question is it that the vaccine caused a fever and that person was prone to getting febrile seizures because we see febrile seizures in children who don't get vaccines? Or is it that it was the vaccine? Either way, when my son had a seizure as baseline from his neurological status from delivery, when it was time to get that, my brain was like, well, what if I give this to him and he seizes? Because his brain is already at risk for seizures because of his history. What if I give this? I had to talk to my neurologist. She walked me through it. She said, listen, you can wait or you can decide. We don't know what's going to happen. I ended up giving it to him because I believed that, you know what, we'll see how it goes. And he did great. And I know also that children who get the febrile seizure from the DTaP vaccine have good outcomes, meaning in my career, I have seen a few kids get it and they all have led healthy lives, right? I've seen them grow up. So my brain went to that. My brain went to, okay, even if he gets a febrile seizure and that's fine, he will be okay, that he'll make a good recovery. But I say that story because parents can read things and they may hear the side effects that are real, but we always go back to benefit over risk. I don't want my son to get pertussis, and the risk of pertussis far outweighs the risk of getting complications from a febrile seizure, right? Meaning devastating neurological outcomes. So my brain is always looking at that when I talk about vaccines and when I give that guidance. So the first step when I talk to these families is, what have you heard? I ask where they're coming from. There's no need for me to go rambling off all the side effects if they haven't heard it. What have you heard? And then that kind of guides my conversation. And then I ask them, do they want to hear what I have to say? Because sometimes if they're anti-vax, they don't want to hear. And I've made my point. I'm not going to waste my time and theirs. But they're like, yes, we would love to hear. And then I tell them, I hear you. I'm a mom, and I think we can both agree that we both want the best for our children. And for me, the best for my child was getting the vaccines on schedule. And for you, it may look different, but I want to explain to you why I got that. And I explain to them why I did the vaccine schedule, why I trust it. And then I listen to their follow-up questions. Most of the time, the fact that I didn't meet them with animosity and listen to them, they all agreed to get the vaccines. Or they agreed to a reduced schedule of like, hey, I want to get it, but I just want to get it once a week. And I say, you know what? I'd rather have you get it on a partial reduced schedule than not get it at all. So I'm open. And many of those families come back because they see their child do well. And they're like, actually, for the 4-month vaccine, can we just do them all together? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Because at the 2-month vaccines, it's usually 2 injections or 3 injections in a syrup. And when they realize that their kid's doing well, they're like, okay, I don't know what I was nervous about. And I'm like, I get it. Let's go ahead and do it on routine. And so compassion matters, open to curiosity matters, and then listening to what questions they have has really helped my career and my practice and reach more people with their vaccine questions.
I love that because also, you come from a medical background. You've had years of medical training,
Yes.
From med school to residency, and then some folks go on and do, whether it's an internship or a fellowship. I mean, the learning, and even till today, you're constantly, it's like this constant pursuit of academic excellence in order to keep up with all the changes in medicine and technology. So I understand that for so many people who don't come from that background, it is a black hole. And you only know what you read or what you're told or what you actively seek information for. So I love that there is that curiosity and that you approach it from that angle. My question is, when children, oftentimes newborns, are getting vaccines, I'm always so fascinated that it starts super young. I mean, weeks old, days old, just a couple of months old. What is the benefit of getting it super young versus, say, introducing the same set of vaccines, but then perhaps doing it when they're 2 or 3?
So the only vaccines that are given before the age of 2 months is the Hep B birth dose, which we can talk about, and then RSV, the antibody. It's not a vaccine; it's the Beyfortus is the brand name. Those are the only 2 that are given before the age of 2 months. And the reason those are given is that based on research, data, what we see complications-wise. Now, the Hep B birth dose, there is some debate on whether that's really needed in moms who have good, solid prenatal care, are not IV drug users, are in a monogamous relationship. And in that situation, I have had conversations with a lot of those families on it's okay to wait until the 2-month visit when we do it as a combination vaccine. But the reality is at the 2-month visit, it's given in the combination vaccine. And there's no reason in waiting given the fact that the benefit outweighs the risk. Is the baby going to get Hep B at 2 months? Likely not. Could they get Hep B when they're sexually active? Yes. Could they get Hep B if they get bit by another child on a playground who has Hep B? Yes. Are those things common? No. But the vaccine is so well studied, so well tolerated, in my opinion, that I would recommend not delaying it past the 2-month mark. The newborn birth dose of the Hep B can be delayed if you have good health screenings and you have a monogamous relationship. And that is one example that we can hold. But giving it at birth, I'm not going to be like, you're crazy. Like, you had your Hep B testing. Like, you don't do it. I gave both my kids the birth dose, and a lot of my families get it because, again, the benefit greatly outweighs any risk from what we see in the population. Now, the rotavirus is another one that we give at 2 months. The RSV is something that I highly recommend just because babies are more prone to getting hospitalized with RSV under the age of 6 months. And so when you look at the vaccine, the answer to the why so young is we're vaccinating against the things that are most vulnerable in that age group. So I use the example of rotavirus. Rotavirus is a vaccine that's a syrup that's given 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months. But if a child doesn't start it by the time they're 8 months, they don't get the series, meaning you don't start rotavirus at 1 year. And why is that? It's because rotavirus can cause really bad diarrhea, which can lead to dehydration and hospitalization, which is most risky for the infancy period because their bodies are smaller, right? They can get more devoid of fluids. So you have to understand that the design and timing is based on what their immune systems can handle, maternal immunity, right? Obviously, we don't start flu vaccine because the baby actually has some immunity from mom, and we don't give it earlier than 6 months because their immune systems are a little too young before that.
Right.
So it's carefully designed, looking at when is the earliest that makes sense to prevent that complication or illness from happening, and when can their body handle it. And that is not just, oh, let's just decide. That is carefully thought out. Vaccines take years to kind of come onto the market. And then within that, there's trials using real humans. There's trials maybe comparing it from other vaccines that already exist, or cold placebo studies that test the vaccine against a placebo, which is nothing in the vaccine. And that is how they're carried out. So to know that they're safe and they're efficacious, because safety and efficacy is the goal of a vaccine. We're not going to give something that's not efficacious, and we're not going to give something that's not safe. And by that, I mean benefits don't outweigh risks.
And again, I think, the vaccines that we're talking about in children have been around, for many of them, for decades. The research on them is ongoing. And I don't think they can be clubbed into the coronavirus vaccine because it was almost like an arms race, it felt, during that time. I mean, you had, of course, hundreds of thousands of people across not just the United States, but in other countries, getting intubated, getting sick.
Yes.
There were so many fatalities during that time. And it wasn't just the older population, but really young, healthy people as well. And it felt like also a little bit of a money grab by the big pharma companies during that time. Like whoever could, like that quote unquote arms race, like whoever could get to that finish line and push out the product. And then, of course, we still don't know what the side effects will be because we've yet to even cross a decade into having taken them. But this is a completely separate mechanism that you're talking about, right? I mean, talk to me about the research that happens before anything is introduced to an infant.
I love this. And I want to be clear about the COVID vaccine, because you are right that we could say the same thing about all the vaccines we have that are more routine, that when you talk to pediatricians 20 years ago, they will say measles was horrible, or, pertussis was horrible. And so we're kind of victims of, survivor bias in that stance, right? That we can say, well, gosh, thank God, we didn't get affected by COVID. But let's be clear that COVID, especially when it first came out, the virus, right? Meaning in 2019, end of 2019, 2020, 2021, that strain was causing a lot of harm. And I want to be very transparent that we cannot deny that. That is not fake. That is, if you don't believe that, you could talk to my husband. My husband was very scared. We both saw what he saw, and it was terrifying. And so let's be clear that we're so lucky that we all made it, if we're alive right now. But that being said, viruses can change the way they act, right? And COVID is changing the way it's acting. Also, to be honest, you are right that you said that we don't know the complications of the vaccine. We also don't know the complications of the virus, because the virus hasn't been around. So you could easily say that, this virus can lead to hearing difficulties. It can lead to long COVID. It can lead to that. And that is why I'm never going to say you're crazy for getting the COVID vaccine, because I don't believe that. I just thought, I'm taking a chance here that I see people have good outcomes. I'm not seeing a lot of long COVID. But to your point, and my point here, you could see complications from the virus.
Yeah.
I have a cold right now. It could be COVID, and I don't know how it's going to fare, but I don't want us to dismiss the fact that the virus itself can also cause a lot of harm. And the best decision making is understanding what makes sense for you, that I don't want to take that chance. I rather actually trust science and trust the mRNA technology and get it. And I actually would not fault anyone to do that, because the technology isn't new. Just because the coronavirus vaccine is new, mRNA technology has existed for decades. And so it's not that it's going to change our DNA or cause harms. And that's the thing about vaccines, even the newer ones on the market, that the long track record is that there's not a lot of vaccines that have caused, there's none that have caused long-term harm. The harm that we've seen with all vaccines on the market have come initially in the first year of approval or authorization. So using the COVID as an example, the blood clots, right? With the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we saw that, but blood clots can also happen with COVID. the actual infection. So it really comes down to understanding that we are trying to do our best with preventing enough complications from an actual infection than the actual vaccine itself. And with the research we have with vaccines that have been on the market for decades, and that includes your routine schedule, okay? I don't want to name all them off, but that's everything you get between the ages of 2 months to 5 years, okay? Those have been out for at least 20 plus years, at least all of those, okay? And when you do research for vaccines, so first they come up with, we need this. So they look at, why do we need this? And it's usually because there's some threat, kind of like what happened with the COVID virus. And then they decide, okay, is there a vaccine that already exists? So let's say there's a vaccine for polio and they want to update the polio. So they'll test it against the old polio vaccine and not against a placebo, because it's unethical to test against a placebo if a current treatment exists, right? So they'll look at it. They'll look at how it's better. How does it compare to the existing options we have? And then they'll authorize and approve it. They'll recruit patients, and there's a lot of people willing to go into vaccine studies to look at the efficacy and the safety in all the clinical trials. And then it gets approved for the market. And then it comes out on the market, and pediatricians start administering it all over the country. And this is after it's been studied in research groups, after it's been authorized by the FDA, after they scrutinize it with a fine-tooth comb on, does it make sense to introduce this to the market? And then they introduce it, and then what happens is we get population data. We give the vaccine. Pediatricians are constantly looking at, is this vaccine causing any issue? Whenever I vaccinate, when the family comes back, I ask them, how did your child do? Amazing. They did great. Did they have a fever? Yes. Okay. And if I see any red flag, I put that in my brain, and I also have to report it. So we are constantly looking at the quality of these vaccines, and it's not treating these patients as guinea pigs. It's making sure that we know that this on-market vaccine is doing the job that it needs to do, and that I'm not getting random side effects that are concerning. I'm not getting anything that I should have my blinkers go on, that something's off here. And so that is the checks and balances that exist. And it's really important to me. And, with the COVID vaccine, a lot of the reason why I didn't get it for my kids is I had a lot of parents tell me that, listen, doctor, like, my kid has had COVID and they just felt more crummy after the COVID vaccine, meaning body aches, chills that were worse than they had the COVID vaccine. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, so maybe just get the COVID illness. And that is a personal, professional experience that I was seeing. And knowing that I'm not seeing a lot of kids get hospitalized or super sick, I ended up being okay with families deciding not to get it. But I'm not going to be okay with the other vaccines, because I see the risk of those infections. Flu, for example, I see the healthy kid get super sick, get sepsis, and die. I've seen that, and I can't get that out of my head. And so when you see the risk of vaccines, you're gonna be swayed to, give the guidance that makes sense for what you've seen. And that's kind of what guides my guidance too. It's not just like the AAP or CDC is telling you what to do. It's what have I seen? And that is when people start saying that they've seen things that, like, these kids are getting a lot of harm. I'm like, how is that possible when I've worked for 10 years and I also have a huge practice that has thousands and thousands of patients? We would have sounded the alarm if we were seeing the things that some people are claiming they're seeing. And so that's what gets you curious about, like, are you lying? Like, I would sound the alarm too if I saw a lot of kids get something like their lights go out after vaccines, that commentary. That's not what I'm seeing. I don't see that. So are we spreading misinformation, or what is our agenda here? Because if I saw that, I wouldn't keep it silent. I'm not that type of doctor, nor are most of the pediatricians in this world.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I remember my firstborn was born in January 2021. So we were at the thick of the of the COVID virus, and it had also exacerbated by that point, because then there was a worse strain that had come out at the end of 2020. And I remember I had COVID when I was pregnant, and so I was told by my pediatrician and my OBGYN that she too has the antibodies just from being in utero at the time. And yeah, I was sharing with you that I'm married to a physician, and so we sort of were really going back and forth whether or not to give her the COVID vaccine when it came out for children. And we decided to do it. We decided, and there was a lot of trepidation. But again, to your point, I think it's such a personal choice. And I think for me, the fear mongering and the fear was really about the virus and what it could potentially do to her if she were to get it. versus the side effects of the information that, granted, some of it is still unknown, but again, it was like a risk
Yes.
benefit analysis. And then I didn't do it for my second child who came 2 years later, because by then the virus had mutated to a point where it was not such a threat.
I love that. And I also did the same decision making. And so again, this is and you asked that question, this is much different than the routine ones, right? Because the routine ones, we know how those viruses look like. Nothing's changing. The flu is bad. Like flu is flu. Like I see healthy kids like get really bad with the flu, but even your routine stuff, those things, we don't want to bring those back because those things weren't like a COVID mutating strain. Those things were always bad. But like to your point, when the vaccine finally came out for my son, like by the time that he could get it, he had already had COVID 3 times because he was in the world and he had 2 parents that were physicians and we brought it home. And even though we were vaccinated, right, at that point. So then it became
and wearing your N90 masks and all it didn't matter. Yeah.
So then it became, okay, my son's in childcare. He probably got it from childcare. He had it 3 times by the time the vaccine came out and he fared well, meaning it wasn't fun, but it wasn't like he didn't have bad complications. So then we're like, he had it 3 times. What's the point? So we didn't get it for him. My daughter, I was actually ready to give it to her because she was an infant. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Like I'm pro-vaccine here. But then she got COVID at 4 months old and it was a bad cold, fever, cold. And that changed our decision making because we're like, okay, she had COVID. This is how it fared for her. What do you think? And my husband and I educated people. And I want to be clear that I don't think people who don't get vaccines are not educated.
Correct.
I think it's about making informed choices that weigh benefit and risk and having that conversation with your partner without vilifying the decision other people make. Because I'm not going to sit here and say that the vaccine is harmful because it's not. It's not a harmful vaccine. It just didn't make sense for our family having had COVID and my husband seeing what he saw to get it. And so that is where I get defensive, right? When people are like, the COVID vaccine is this and that. And then people could be like, well, Dr. Mona, you didn't even get it. I'm like, well, yeah, I didn't get it, but I will not stand for people spreading lies when it's not facts.
Right.
If it came out that the vaccine research shows that it's not efficacious, I will say, yeah, I probably saw that. That's why I didn't get it. But I'm not going to ever.
Clarify, when you say I didn't get it, you didn't get it for your second child. Is the part where you didn't get it because they had already had COVID and sort of
the illness.
Their body had built the antibodies.
Exactly.
For it.
Yeah.
You talked about daycare. And I really want to ask you this because we have so many parents watching and listening who have kids at daycare. When you go to a daycare, and there's tons of illnesses that spread. I mean, every day you hear of like some email notification every parent gets saying, oh, we have an outbreak of hand, foot, and mouth.
Oh, yes.
Or, oh, someone has RSV or someone has this or someone has that. And so please monitor your child. What does the daycare look like if half the children in the class are vaccinated and the other half isn't? Like, who is susceptible here? Are the unvaccinated or non-vaccinated children any threat to the children that are vaccinated? Or if the vaccinated child comes in with a flu, what sort of impact is that having on the group of kids that don't have a vaccine?
I'm in Florida, and so it's a very interesting question because Florida is lifting the vaccine mandates that they have. And I'm bringing that up because it's a huge point of concern because I believe that every parent should know what they're getting themselves into when they sign their kid up for a facility, whether that's a school system or a preschool. So, for example, my son went to a preschool.
Can you double click on that? So just for our viewers who don't know what the Florida vaccine mandate is.
So Florida had a vaccine mandate that to enter school systems, you had to have a minimum expectation of the routine childhood vaccines. Now they are dropping that mandate. What that means is that no longer is it required to have required vaccines to enter a school system. They haven't made it clear on what that means for preschools, but I imagine they're also going to lift the preschool mandates. What I mean by mandate is when you go to a preschool or school in Florida, you have to give your vaccine records in order to attend. And that school usually follows the American Academy of Pediatrics schedule of the routine vaccines. Flu is optional, usually, but some schools require flu. Not all, actually, in the state of Florida. And COVID is not on that list, and RSV is not on that list. So it's a huge point of concern because now we're not going to have, now children are allowed to come into school systems without vaccination. My most concern is for the age group that you're bringing up because think about, so if your kid's in school age, and if my son is a school age kid and he's vaccinated, I'm not as worried of him going to school because he's fully vaccinated against all the things, right? Remember, you don't get all your immunity with one injection. Many of the vaccines come in series, so you have to get multiple doses in the series to be fully vaccinated or get the full immunity. So if he goes to school and he's in a school system with children who don't have measles or the pertussis vaccine, and that child brings it into the system, my son is at a better chance of faring well because he's vaccinated. So I'm not worried about him. Who I am worried about is the immunocompromised children, right, who may not be able to vaccinate fully, and they need us to protect themselves, right, to protect them. Or now we have siblings who are home, who are under 5, who are not fully vaccinated. And that is why the preschool concern is actually more of my concern than the school age. I don't know what's going to happen with the preschoolers, but your question is a valid one, that it becomes a parent having now to decide what is the threshold of risk that they're comfortable with, because it's not to say that these viruses are the mainstay in the community, right? Measles, pertussis, we are seeing rises in Florida right now. And that concerns me. I don't want measles to get spread around preschools. I don't want pertussis to get spread around preschools. And if you are a 2-year-old who has the pertussis vaccine and has the measles vaccine, you're still not fully vaccinated until you are 4 and 5 years old against those things. So you are less susceptible than a child who's not vaccinated, but you are more susceptible given that you're not fully vaccinated. And so it's a tough situation. I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't know how I would have navigated it, because I don't want to send my kid to a preschool who doesn't have a vaccine policy, because I rely on my community to help my kid, right? My daughter's preschool currently has a vaccine policy. And I've talked to them about that. And I said, are you guys going to lift it? And they're like, no, because they don't get funding from the school. Or from the state. So the issue is likely going to be with anything that is getting funding from the state. They're going to lift the mandates, because otherwise they're going to be threatened to remove funding. And that's a really sad reality, and it's not right. Because if you're going to be in a community setting, there should be mandates, in my opinion, for the routine vaccines, because those have been tried and tested. Unless your physician says that you have a medical exemption, which is rare. I'm not requiring COVID. I'm not requiring flu, which I would love, but the routine ones should be done because they're efficacious and the benefits outweigh the risk. And that is a huge concern. And parents are now going to have to make decisions and talk to their preschool about what the policy is. And we could see a lot of people leaving the workforce if they decide that risk isn't worth it. And that's likely going to be mothers, because mothers tend to leave the workforce more than men. I think it's going to be a huge issue in states, especially red states, because it's going that way, lifting mandates.
And when you say leaving the workforce to perhaps
care for the child,
or
care for the child. And I don't think it's going to be the people who have fully vaccinated children entering a school system, because like I said, their kids fully vaccinated. The risk of getting a complication with any vaccine preventable illness is very rare, right? Yeah. Like if you're a 5-year-old, you've been fully vaccinated. I'm talking about the preschool age. Like if you're wanting to send your child to a preschool that doesn't have a vaccine policy, you're putting your child at risk of being open to pertussis and measles because they're not fully vaccinated. That is the concern I have for the preschool age child. What is the parent going to decide to do?
I have so many questions, but I'm going to try and just ask you, I guess, the really big ones that come up for parents. And one of them is, when you sort of look at the spectrum of all the diseases and all the viruses that are around us, and I guess if you really had to cherry pick, right? So say a parent is like, I don't want to do the full schedule. And it's probably going to be a hard question, but when you see sort of the risks, the side effects, the potential, I guess, fatality or effect of a certain illness on a child, if you had to cherry pick, like, here are the top 2 that, in my opinion, from everything I've seen, is non-negotiable. Not to say that it negates everything else, because I know that's, from what I know of you, you're not going to go down that route. But if you just had to pick, like, if you're only going to get 2, have it be these 2.
This is like choosing your favorite child. Like, how could you do that to me? No, I love this. But this is a question I often get asked. So I'm happy that we're doing it. And I actually, for your listeners, I have a free vaccine guide, which is always free. It's one thing that I will never put behind a paywall. This is a Dr. Mona promise that you can link, and they just have to give their email to be able to access it. But it's about like 80 plus page or 50 plus pages on like everything you may want to know about vaccines. But to
Okay.
answer your question, a lot of this answer comes from what I've seen in my career, which is different than what if you were to ask a pediatrician that's been practicing for 40 years, what they have seen. Because remember, in the last 40 years, a lot of these vaccines were created. So they may say, well, Dr. Mona, I would put that on top of the list. So my response takes into consideration what my colleagues who've been practicing for way longer have seen, and also what I've seen together, right?
Okay.
Knowing that I don't want your kid to get X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So we're getting like the full 40-year
History.
here. Yeah. The
Yeah.
answer. Yeah.
And so my first one would be DTaP. DTaP is your diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. I am not concerned about diphtheria. I'm not concerned about that because diphtheria is very rare in modern history, but I am concerned about pertussis. And you can't break out the DTaP component. So the reason I'm so concerned about pertussis is that I have seen pertussis cause a lot of harm in infants and newborns, and we've seen kids die from it. And so DTaP is one of the ones that I'm very big on, and that is going to be the first one that I do not want an infant to be delayed on. The next one is Prevnar, and Prevnar is your pneumococcal vaccine. Why I'm big on that is that it shows that you can actually reduce the risk of ear infections, and just since the invention of the Prevnar, we haven't seen as many ear infections as we have after the introduction. Kids can still get ear infections, but the Prevnar really reduced that risk. And so DTaP, Prevnar. The next one, and I'm only going to do the vaccines in the first 2 years because obviously there's more after that. The next one would be my Hib. Hib is your Hib meningitis. I have seen children with Hib meningitis, both vaccinated and unvaccinated, lead to devastating outcomes, including hearing loss, neurological devastation, becoming vegetables with the illness, not the vaccine. And so Hib is a close third. I mean, I would put it maybe even equal to Prevnar because of the devastation it can cause. And then, so you have DTaP, Hib, and then I have polio. And the reason why polio is on there, even though we don't see polio in the modern age, is I don't want to see polio in the modern age. So I'm putting polio there, even though I have never seen. We cannot discount the fact that the polio vaccine was one of the most amazing inventions of modern science. And so that is why polio is on that list. And it's number 4 because I haven't seen it. And then would be Hep B. Hep B, again, like I said, the reason why it's down on this list is that if you have good prenatal care, the risk is low, but it's not zero. And getting Hep B in the infancy or toddler period can lead to chronic liver failure that you cannot reverse. So God forbid, mom did not get tested, or mom's partner was cheating on her and gave her Hep B after the testing was done. This sounds like such minutia, but you never know, right? I don't want the kid to get Hep B because if they get Hep B, it's devastating. And so that's why Hep B is still on this list. And then you have your rotavirus. And I already mentioned that earlier, is that if you are in a daycare setting where rotavirus is more readily spread, the risk is there. But if you're not, it's the one vaccine that I'm like, okay, like if you don't want to get it, this is your routine vaccines. Now, optional ones, I'm very pro RSV. I think it's a great invention. Flu, I'm very pro, and COVID, you already know my thoughts. It's a shared decision making. I'm not against it. I just want parents to talk to me, and I want to figure out what we want to do. But that is in the nutshell. And I don't think I'm missing any. DTaP, Prevnar, Hib, yep, those are the first. Oh, and your MMR and chickenpox, I forgot those because that's at the 1 year. I would actually put those probably third on that list. So let's put that up by meningitis, just because the devastations of MMR are such that can cause a lot of harm. And then the devastations of chickenpox, people think that it's just an itchy rash, but honestly, we see hearing loss from it, and the child can subsequently get shingles in their future. And for anyone who's had shingles as an adult, it is a pain. So I would put chickenpox and measles high up there as well.
Yeah. That's a great list. You know, the other thing that often I think confuses a lot of parents is, why are there so many vaccines for the one? So there is like multiple booster shots that you need to come in for in either, month-long intervals, or whether it's like a year-long interval. And I think it's sort of becomes like the number count, which sort of feels like a body count that gets really high. So if we were just to give the one shot of everything, maybe you're looking at 5 or something, but it's all the boosters and those add-ons for each of them. what is so important about the booster shot?
I think it's important to remember that because there's booster shots should give you more reassurance about the system, right? Because your body can't take all of that at once. It needs to build memory. So an analogy maybe for someone is that some germs just need more lessons, right? In order for us to create immunity, your body needs slower exposure to build that defense mechanism. If I were to load my system with all of the immune cells that you could get in 5 booster shots in one, that is actually more for my immune system than getting one at a time. So look at booster shots as your body getting introduced, a little introduction of that virus. And depending on the type of vaccine, an inactivated, live can determine how many you need. It also depends on the type of virus or bacteria, right? That is all done in the research phase. What do we need to actually create immunity? And also looking at the research phase, which is over 5+ years, when do we see immunity start to wane? And they look at titers, they check blood tests. So if we notice that we're giving a vaccine and then in 2 months, the immunity is starting to wane in that person, then you're like, ooh, we need to give a booster because the immunity is waning, right? And that is what happens in the development phase. So it's really important to remember that that's by design. I feel more reassured knowing that my kid's not just getting bombarded with all of the things that you can give in 5 shots in one, right? When you're thinking about boosters, and that their body is getting memory. And then it grows a little bit, their natural defense mechanisms build, their natural immune systems build, and then boom, another vaccine, right? In that booster series. They're more mature. Boom, another vaccine in that booster series. It's building as their body's building. And that to me is highly reassuring that we are working with the child as they grow. And you mentioned earlier, and I want to address this because you said like a lot of people feel like this is a money grab. If this was actually a money grab, and I already have my issues with big pharma, don't get me wrong, I think things could be more affordable. If this was truly a money grab, they would be charging consumers as well for the vaccine, but all of it's covered by insurance. It's all covered by insurance. So if this was truly the money grab people thought it would be, pediatricians would be pocketing that dough, which we do not. I get paid very little to see patients in office. And it would be such. So yes, insurance companies have their own finances that they work out with insurance companies, which already is a problem that I can't speak to. But from a consumer standpoint, if this was truly a money grab, they would be charging you $500 a pop to get vaccines. But no, it's covered. And that is reassuring to me. And now my worry is that when if insurance companies ever decide that it's too expensive or they don't want to do it, what's going to happen? Because then people are going to be like, well, now look at this, I have to pay. But think about that. If it was actually a money grab, it wouldn't be free to you.
Correct. I mean, all you have to pay is probably
a copay for the visit.
For the doctor visit.
But that's because we're doing other things as well. And we need that money to be able to freaking keep our lights on.
Right.
Like
Nothing
pediatricians are the lowest paid specialty. If we actually made the money that people thought we made, we would be in our yachts in the Bahamas. But here I am on a podcast with you. Yes.
Which I hope is just as good as a yacht in the Bahamas.
It is. This is very zen. I love it. I'm good. I feel good. All I need is my, this is water, but if I had like a little, like a fruity beverage, that would be great.
Maybe a fruity cocktail or a
exactly. No, but this is a valid point. And I want to be clear because there is a design to this that is for the benefit of the child, right? All of this is not by causing harm. I would never, I did a do no harm pledge, but I believe it. And I'm very critical. I'm a critical thinker. Like I'm not the type that you get fed something and you just do it. Like I think about things like using the COVID vaccine. I was like, does it make sense? And I think people trust me more because they know that I'm not just like, dish and serve. It's no, like I'm going to think with you. I'm going to talk with you, but I'm never going to discount science, data, and I'm never going to discount the benefits and advancements of modern medicine. Like that is something that I will always, always, always support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also there's been, a lot of fear over the years that there were certain diseases that might potentially wipe out populations.
Yes.
Whether it was like the Black Plague and I think it was the 17 or 1800s.
Or like smallpox. Like,
or Black Fever, or at one point, I think it was the Ebola outbreak. And then of course, coronavirus. So I think the other sort of risk benefit analysis is like protecting groups of population in parts of the country and parts of the world that could potentially be completely wiped out if a disease or virus really took hold.
Like I've said this before, that being anti-vax is a choice of a privileged person. To have such privilege, to not have to worry about dying from an illness or think that you're not that you're completely immune. Like there are so
Yeah.
many people in this country or in this world that like walk miles to get vaccines, and I'm not
Yeah.
just making that up. I'm talking like in underserved areas, developing countries that were like, please give me this because I have seen people die from this. So what a privilege to be able to have the decision that I don't
Yeah.
need to vaccinate and not think that this is something that can affect you. And that is, to me, privilege. And I want to be clear that I think a huge disservice that both sides do. So we talk a lot about the anti-vax spreading misinformation. You alluded to this, that I think the medical community can do a better job of not preaching fear. And that happened during the peak of the pandemic, that if you don't get this, you are going to die.
Yeah.
That is not helpful, right? What it should be is, I want you to get this because there is a risk of hospitalization. Here is what we know. We don't have great data yet because we're still learning, but I want you to get this because this can reduce your chances of getting hospitalized. I want you to get this because of X, Y, and Z. Because when we start to explain that versus you need to get this because you're going to die, that fear is no better than the fear we're creating with the misinformation around vaccines. And
Yeah.
I have taken that approach. I used to be the fear person in the pandemic. And then I started listening to my community. I started listening to my families, and I'm like, I can still be pro-vaccine, but still understand the middle ground. And to be honest with you, that has ostracized me from a lot of science communicators. And that also, but what it has done is I've been able to convince people to vaccinate because I'm meeting them in the middle. I'm not meeting them with fear. I'm meeting them with, I get this sentiment. I'm understanding where you're coming from, but I want you to know that I want the best for your child just like you do. When we start to say and think that parents who don't vaccinate don't want the best for their kid, that is when we have already created this reality that we're better than them.
Yeah.
When
And
I
that's not
actually
true
think
at
they
all.
do.
Yeah.
I believe that they want the best, but their
Yeah.
brain is saying that the best is not vaccines. And I may not be able to sway them, but who can I sway to understand that here is why I want your child to be protected?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, information is power, and it's really, I always look at that group or that sentiment as perhaps being, the ones that are on the periphery, as sort of perhaps not having all the information on hand to feel really confident in a decision. So sometimes the only path is like to take no action, but it doesn't necessarily mean they want to go down that, no vaccination route. The last thing I want to talk to you about, because we cannot not talk about it, Tylenol.
Oh, yes.
The
That could
dirty
be a whole episode.
the dirty T word these
Yes,
days.
yes. Poor
So
Tylenol being dragged into all this.
I
Yeah.
know I would really like to see what that sort of stock price or what that, sale price of Tylenol is doing.
Yeah.
But there's been all these reports. So there's two reports, and I guess, there's the Tylenol and the effects of taking Tylenol in pregnancy. But let's put that aside. What I want to focus on is Tylenol and the links to autism in children who take Tylenol. So can you explain to us, how did this even start? I think without maybe making this too political or pointing any fingers. And then what does the research really tell us?
So, the origin comes from a well-meaning place, is that there has been some studies, and they're not the best designed studies, meaning they didn't look at other confounding variables. What I mean by that for a listener is when we do a study, with any study, and I used to organize research studies in undergrad. So this is my bread and butter in the psych world, but similar to what we're thinking about here. When you design a study, you have to think about, how can I reduce any external variables that may not be explained by the data I have on hand. So for example, we know autism is multifactorial. So if you're designing a study about Tylenol use in pregnancy, are we accounting for the genetics factors? Are we accounting for environmental factors? Are we accounting for, do maybe the mom themselves have autism and they have a lower pain threshold, and that's why they're taking Tylenol? Like, there's a lot of confounding variables, or there's a lot of things that aren't being discussed. And that is the problem with the existing studies that these people have claimed and have ran with. So there are studies out there that show that there could be a link. But when you look at the limitations, even the creators of the study say that there's limitations. And that is really important when you're reading research, that when you read a research study, they look at your, abstract, meaning what is this about, a summary, and then at the end, it's limitations. And every research study has to self-report the limitations that they think is part of the study. And when it gets peer reviewed, which means from other people from the world, then they look at those limitations and they add any other limitations. And so even the creator of the study from, Harvard and all of that said that there was limitations, that we cannot prove a causal relationship between Tylenol use in pregnancy and autism in children. Is it a correlation that maybe there's some correlation? Yes. But is there a correlation between why these moms have pain? What is their pain threshold? What is their genetic factors? What is going on here? Like, we can't. So until we can prove causal, we can't go on a stage and say Tylenol is the reason that your child is autistic. That is not fair to do. We can say, hey, best practice here, based on the data we have, which is really reassuring in sibling studies. In sibling studies that were done in Denmark, it shows that moms who took Tylenol in one pregnancy and not another, if they were siblings, there was no increased risk of neurodiversity. So that's the same genetics, right? And so it goes to show you that there is an understanding here that we have to look at all the data, look at all the limitations, and we can't just make causal links without there being a causal link. And so best practices with the information we have is saying what everyone's been saying is take Tylenol if you need it. You're not taking it around the clock, but if you need it, that is the best pain reliever in pregnancy. We're not worried in the pediatric or OB-GYN community that you now led down this path of autism. I am still not worried about that. What I don't want is people to down Tylenol thinking that it's safe, because that's not safe, right? Yeah. We take a benefit risk approach and say, okay, there's some causation here, or there's some correlation here, but there's no causation. So there's some rumors here. I'm in pain. I'm not going to suffer, which I would not want any of my moms to suffer in pregnancy. I'm going to take this medicine as needed. Autism is highly genetic, and that is what we know. Like, I have seen so many autistic children whose parents either are autistic or later the parent is like, guess what? I just got diagnosed. And I'm like, I'm not surprised, because your quirkiness was not autism, or it was not you being quirky. It was actually autism. So it's very important to remember the genetic component. I don't want to be dismissive in saying that we shouldn't dismiss data, but it's how am I going to take the information I have and make the best choices with what we have now?
And then what about children who take Tylenol and the effects of that? I presume from listening to what you just said about Tylenol and pregnancy, it's the same logic that applies to the kids. Is that true?
So where this myth came from is that people think that Tylenol at regular doses can deplete something called glutathione. And glutathione is part of our system that can help reduce inflammatory markers and, toxins in our body. But that's only a concern if you take a lot of Tylenol, that it can deplete glutathione. So this is a myth that has been ridden into the sunset, right? But when you take Tylenol at its normal doses that is on the packaging, you're not depleting it to a level that's concerning. And so that is where this myth comes. So now the thought here is that if you take Tylenol, you depleted glutathione, and now you can't detox from the toxins of vaccines. There's so much misinformation, because one, that's not how Tylenol works. Number two, vaccines don't have toxins. So there's two issues here. Like, vaccines are not toxic. They contain substances that are meant to keep the vaccine stable, that are safe and studied in the human body. Aluminum may be in them. Not all vaccines have them. Different things in the vaccine. So that is that myth. And so my same advice goes, you don't want to just give your kid Tylenol for the sake of giving Tylenol. Same thing like you wouldn't give them ibuprofen or Motrin for the sake of it. But if your child needs it, I have no fear in giving it as needed. But we don't want to flip to the other side of just, give it willy-nilly, because I'm not a believer in giving medicine for no reason.
Right.
There's a benefit and risk there. So we want to give it as needed.
Yeah, because over-medicating your child is also an issue,
Yes.
in some households, where every knee-jerk, every sort of cough or every sniffle is all of a sudden like someone grabbing, something from the medicine cabinet. And so that's also not the route to take. What is your sort of final advice for parents, especially of newborn kids, that are navigating this? Are there some websites and resources apart from yours, which we're also going to link. And I love that free guide that you're offering our audience, which we will
Yes.
also link in our description below. And, you know, is it the American Association of Pediatrics? Like, what are some other resources?
I love this. And so my first question or my first comment would be, there's a lot of information out there. And in this day and age of modern parenting, that is not a good thing. Okay. I cannot stress this enough that too much information is very harmful. It can do a few things. It can overwhelm you. You can get bad information, but it also can make you not listen to your intuition. I do believe that everyone has intuition, that if you had no one to help you and no one to answer your questions with your child, you would figure out what to do. How do I know that? Because that's what generations before had to do, right? That is what cavemen had to do with their kids. But what happens is when people start making commentary, you're not able to tap into the intuition. So I want you to think that you're a cave woman or a caveman and think that if I had no help, how would I look at my baby in front of me, and what are my value systems for raising this child? The beauty of modern era is that we have the access to intellectuals and people who know more than you, because you can't do this alone. And that is how you find the people that align with your value system and that are more educated in topics. What I mean by that is maybe following people like myself, finding a pediatrician that you can talk to about your concerns, finding a mom group or a dad group that makes you feel supported, right? That is your key to feeling supported in a community, because there's so much information out there, but I don't want people to feel like they have to do it alone, because in modern medicine and modern parenting, it's a beauty to have that support system, but you also need to make sure that you have that right support system for the anxieties that you have. And so my favorite resources, and you're going to notice that I'm not including the CDC anymore in this list because of just the back and forth and turmoil that they're going through right now.
Yeah, and the leadership changes.
Yes, leadership changes. And honestly, they've just been pulling too much to the politicization of healthcare that I'm not for it. They're rehashing the autism vaccine link. They're not practicing evidence-based or clinical-based practice of medicine, which I'm not for. So my favorite resources right now are the PFID, Partnership to Fight Infectious Diseases, which takes a evidence-based, clinical-based approach. American Academy of Pediatrics, which does the exact same thing. They're very evidence-based, and they are the voice of a lot of pediatricians that are on the ground. And then I also like immunize.org. Those are my three go-to right now. And I will continue to provide my guidance. My vaccine guide is updated anytime there's a big decision. I recently updated it in October of 2025, just because I wanted to add more questions about the vaccine inserts and what do you mean? Like, why is it listed? So that's why it's getting longer and longer, but it's meant to be this comprehensive guide that patients and families can look through and make the truly informed decision, giving what I see. And I see a lot of things, and I am honest. I'm like, I've seen kids with febrile seizures. I've seen kids with X, Y, and Z. And I tell you what I see honestly, because there's no money behind it. I'm not trying to make money. I'm not partnering with anybody for that. To me, that transparency is really important.
Yeah, I love the neutrality of your approach. And to your point, all right, this is sort of like an active thing that constantly needs updating and re-education as we get more information. Dr. Mona, thank you so much for speaking to me today. I loved our conversation.
I loved it too. Thank you for trusting me in this important topic. There's a lot of voices out there, and I think having the platform to be able to give this very balanced approach, I want to be clear that sometimes people can look at someone who's pro-vaccine and think, well, they're not listening to the other side. I can attest that I am listening to the other side. Anytime I post a video, anytime I have an interaction and parents start telling me things about, this, that, I don't dismiss it. I actually take it and I say, okay, what are we learning here? What can I learn from this? And that, like you said, is my continuing medical education. Seeing patients is one thing, but online with my over 1.5 million followers across all platforms, I am continuously learning on being a better communicator and better serving the population. And I really appreciate you having me on to trust me with this conversation today.
Yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.